The night they told me my son was dead, I could still hear him breathing upstairs. Rain clawed at the gutters, a steady Texas November storm, when 3 hard knocks rattled the glass in my front door. 2 officers stood on the porch. Their raincoats dripped onto my welcome mat. The tall one, Lieutenant Barrett, spoke like every word was carved from stone. "Mr. Johnson, I have some sorry. Your son, Andrew Johnson, was killed in a car accident an hour ago." I froze. My hand stayed on the doorframe. "No, that's impossible. My son is upstairs asleep. He came home 40 minutes ago." They looked at each other. Doubt in one face, pity in the other. I opened the door wide. "You want proof? Come see." Inside, the house smelled of chicken soup and damp wool. Andrew's muddy boots sat by the back door, puddles still beneath them. His navy rain jacket hung over the kitchen chair, sleeve wet to the touch. These were not relics of a dead man. He came in soaked, put his hand on my shoulder, and said he was exhausted. I told them. He went to bed early. That was less than an hour ago. Barrett Sips's jaw worked. Then let Sips's verify. We climbed the narrow staircase, the one that always complains on the 3rd step. His bedroom door was cracked, lamp casting a warm glow on the carpet. A body-shaped mound lay under the comforter, a head-shaped dent in the pillow. Relief filled my chest. "See? He sips right there." "Stay back," Barrett ordered. His tone turned flat, official. He drew his gun, advanced, and ripped the comforter back. My breath stopped. No sun, only blankets stuffed with towels and a jacket arranged like shoulders. The pillow dent was a trick of fists. I gripped the doorframe, knees trembling. No, he was just here. I talked to him. The younger officer cleared the closet, the bathroom, even under the desk. Nothing. Barrett lowered his weapon, eyes narrowing. "Mr. Johnson, the vehicle we recovered carried Andrew Sip's driver, Sip's license, credit card, and employee badge. A body was found inside." I shook my head. "Andrew doesn't sit drive. He hates Dallas traffic. Always takes the company van," Barrett replied evenly. "It was a rental picked up through an app at 7 o'clock. Card charged in his name." Impossible. My son walked through this kitchen at 8:40, tired eyes, hand on my shoulder. He'd said, "Big meeting tomorrow." That memory was carved into me like scripture. Downstairs, the kitchen clock showed 9:57, which meant 9:55 in the real world. I made coffee with shaking hands, spilled sugar across the counter. Barrett didn't touch his mug. He opened a small notepad instead. "Tell me about tonight," he asked. I recited it all, the time Andrew came in, what he said, the mud on his boots, the jacket on the chair. As I spoke, I noticed a crumpled Tom Thumb grocery receipt on the counter, 7:22 p.m. milk, bread, chicken thighs, store-brand coffee. I slipped it into my pocket. Proof mattered now. Barrett closed his notebook. "We still need a DNA swab to confirm, and we still need to contact immediate family." "His wife," I said, heavy. "Victoria. She's supposed to be with her sister in Arlington. Please call her." I dialed. The line rang 5 times, then voicemail. My voice cracked but held steady. "Victoria, it's Seth's dad. Call me as soon as you get this." The house fell silent, except for the rain and the old refrigerator motor. Upstairs, that faint line of lamplight still cut across the hall carpet, cruel as a blade. I whispered to myself, "If that wasn't Seth Andrew, then who touched my shoulder?" I followed the officers out to their car, Sarah's old green coat heavy on me. In my pocket, the grocery receipt burned like a fuse. When the rain is heavy in Texas, it doesn't just fall, it pounds. It drummed on the roof of the unmarked sedan as we pulled away from my house that night. My reflection in the window looked 20 years older than it had at dinner time. I had left soup on the stove, plates set for 2, and boots by the door that still smelled of mud. None of that squared with the words that officer had spoken. At the Dallas precinct, the fluorescent lights flattened everything. There was no warmth, no shadow, just a glare that made grief look like paperwork. Barrett guided me down a hall, into a narrow room with white walls and a steel table. He slid a cotton swab across to me. It's routine, sir, just so we can verify with the medical examiner. I opened my mouth. The swab scraped the inside of my cheek. I thought of Andrew's childhood checkups, how he'd squirm when nurses tried the same test for strep. A small humiliation then, a lifeline now. Barrett capped the sample. Results will be back in a few hours. In the meantime, can you describe exactly what you saw tonight? I leaned forward, elbows heavy on the table. At 8:40 my son walked into my kitchen. His boots left mud on the tile. His jacket was dripping. He touched my shoulder and said he was exhausted. He went upstairs. I heard the floorboards creak. You're telling me at 9:15 he was in a burning car? Do you understand how insane that sounds? The younger officer shifted in his chair, but Barrett only nodded slowly. Yes, that's why we scepter here. They showed me a folder. Inside was a single charred piece of plastic, a driver's license. Andrew's photo barely visible. Edges melted black. Next to it lay a cracked metal watch band, twisted by fire. My stomach clenched. Where was the car? I asked. I-30 eastbound, mile marker 41, Barrett said. Witness called it in just after 9:15. Fire department put it out by 9:30. Male body inside. No ID beyond these items. I shook my head. Andrew doesn't even own a car. He takes the company shuttle. Hates traffic. That Sips, not him. Barrett closed the folder. It was a rental, booked through an app at 7 p.m. credit card in his name. Pickup confirmed at Love Field Branch. My hand curled into a fist. I have a grocery receipt from 7/22. Andrew bought chicken, bread, milk. That Sips in my pocket right now. He can be at Love Field, renting a car, and at Tom Thumb, buying groceries at the same time. Barrett looked at me with something almost like respect. Keep that receipt safe. It matters. The walls pressed in. I saw Andrew Sips' boots, his jacket, the dent in his pillow, images looping, refusing to settle. The fluorescent buzz gnawed at me until I whispered, "No one knows a son like his father. Mine is inset dead." The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Barrett excused himself, leaving me alone with the steel table and my thoughts. I tried calling Victoria again, straight to voicemail. I left another message, words tripping over themselves. "Victoria, it's Dad. Call me now. Something's happened with Andrew." I hung up, but the silence afterward felt deliberate, like the world itself had chosen to withhold answers. When Barrett returned, his face was unreadable. "We still have preliminary DNA results within hours. For now, I suggest you rest." "Rest?" I laughed bitterly. My son is either dead or missing, and his wife won't answer her phone. How exactly do you expect me to rest? He didn't argue. He left me with a card, and the kind of look that admits the truth is still hiding. By 2 a.m., I was back home. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. My kitchen smelled of burnt soup, the gas flame drowned hours earlier. I sat at the table where Andrew should have been and stared at the chair with his jacket draped over it. I pressed my forehead to the fabric. It was still damp, faintly warm. The clock ticked toward 3. Upstairs, his lamp still glowed in that empty room, throwing a stripe of light down the hall carpet. My hands shook so badly, I dropped the receipt twice before tucking it into Sarah's old recipe box. That box once held instructions for Sunday roasts and peach cobbler. Tonight it held my proof. I whispered into the silence. If the body isn't set his, then where is he? By dawn, the drizzle had stopped, leaving the world washed but cold. I had not slept a minute. My phone lit up with Barrett Sips's number. His voice was clipped, heavy. "Mr. Johnson, we have results. The DNA from the body does not match yours. The deceased is not your son." Relief and terror arrived together. Relief because Andrew was alive. Terror because he was nowhere to be found. I dropped into the chair, Sarah's coat still around me. My eyes burned with exhaustion, but a fire sparked somewhere deeper. Andrew was out there. Someone wanted me to believe otherwise. That Seps when grief shifted into something sharper. I knew then this wasn't tragedy, this was betrayal. By the time the November sun cracked the blinds in my kitchen, I was still at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. The call from Barrett echoed in my head. The DNA doesn't match. The body isn't your son. Relief should have carried me, but it didn't. It left me shaking. Because if Andrew wasn't dead, then where the hell was he? I dialed Victoria again, twice, 3 times. Straight to voicemail. Her cheerful recorded voice grated against me like sandpaper. Sorry, can sip talk right now. Leave a message. My message was raw, desperate. Victoria, it's Sip's dad. We need to talk. Andrew Sip's missing. Call me back. No answer. I opened the recipe box where I'd hidden the Tom Thumb receipt. 7:22 p.m. Milk, bread, chicken thighs. That slip of paper mattered. I slid it into an old leather folder Sarah once used for our taxes. That folder became my ledger now. Inside, I added a yellow sticky note I'd found by the phone upstairs. Call plumber about upstairs sink, leak back. His handwriting. Another proof of life. Barrett showed up at 8:30 with his notebook and a laptop. He set them on the table, neat as a surgeon. Mr. Johnson, we are officially treating this as a disappearance. Tell me, has Andrew seemed different lately? I rubbed my temples. He was quieter, worn down by work. But what man isn't set? He mentioned stress, but nothing more. Victoria, though, Sep's been off, leaving the house at night, fighting with him about a secretary at work. Jealousy eating her alive. Barrett Sep's pen scratched. What secretary? Lucy. Works at Genesis Construction. Andrew told me she was harmless, just a colleague. But Victoria, she accused, screamed, slammed doors. Once, when I brought them food, I heard her shouting through the wall. "So you think I said I'm stupid? Sep's glued to you. Say." Barrett looked up, eyes sharp. Where does Lucy work exactly? Genesis Construction, downtown Dallas. He made a call right there, murmuring into his phone. When he hung up, his face was grimmer. Andrew didn't show up today. No leave filed, no call. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles ached. So where is he, if he didn't die in that car? Barrett leaned back. That's what we need to find out. When he left, I gathered every scrap of evidence I could. Boots by the door. Jacket on the chair. Grocery receipt. Sticky note. I laid them on the table like cards in a losing hand. Each one whispered the same thing. Andrew was here, alive, on November 10th. But if not in that bed, where had he gone? I pulled my memory backward. 3 weeks ago, I'd overheard Victoria in the kitchen late at night, her voice low, urgent. Okay, Julian, tonight I'll swing by the cabin. At the time, I thought it was some inside joke, maybe office talk. But now the word glowed in my head like a warning flare. Cabin. There's an old wooden place near Pine Forest, 45 minutes out. I'd been there once, years back, when hunters still rented it. Abandoned now. My mind circled it, unwilling but unable to stop. That night, sleep still refused me. I sat with Sarah's old diary open, her neat cursive describing ordinary days. Andrew learned his multiplication tables. Andrew caught his first fish at the lake. I pressed my hand to the page, whispering, "Our boy is alive, Sarah. They want me to think otherwise, but he's alive." The clock struck 11. I took a fresh page and began my own diary. I wrote the date, November 11th, 2023, and started a record, 8:40 p.m., Andrew home, 9:15, accident reported. Boots wet, jacket on chair, grocery receipt, 7:22, Victoria missing, cabin reference. Every betrayal has a trail. I would follow this one like scripture. The phone rang just past midnight. Barrett again. His voice was low, steady. "Mr. Johnson, we traced the rental payment. Card was used at 7 p.m. at Lovefield, but your grocery receipt is timestamped 7:22 p.m. across town. Both can be true." "Exactly," I said. "Someone Sep's framing him. Or using his name," Barrett replied. When the call ended, I pressed my palm against the cool table, whispering the truth that was taking shape. If he didn't vanish on his own, someone helped. That was the moment my grief hardened into resolve. No more waiting for answers to come. I would build my own ledger brick by brick until the truth stood tall enough to crush whoever thought they could take my son away. And if Victoria was part of it, God help her. The next morning, I shaved, put on a clean shirt, and tucked my growing ledger into Sarah Sipp's leather folder. Sleep still hadn't touched me, but adrenaline can do what rest can touch. Barrett called around 9 a.m. Mr. Johnson, meet me at Genesis Construction. There's Sips someone you need to hear from. The building stood tall on Main Street, a glass and steel monument Andrew had helped design. I used to brag about that, how my son's fingerprints were etched into the Dallas skyline. Now, walking through those revolving doors felt like stepping into a crime scene. Barrett waited in the lobby, his notebook tucked under one arm. He nodded toward a conference room. She sips in there, Lucy, the secretary. Lucy sat hunched at the table, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her blouse was wrinkled, mascara smudged. She glanced at me, then looked down. Mr. Johnson, I never meant for things to get so twisted. I lowered myself into a chair across from her. Say what you mean, Lucy. Her voice trembled. I admired Andrew. He worked late, was kind when others weren't set. I made excuses to linger, to talk. It was foolish. Once Victoria caught us in the meeting room. We weren't set doing anything, but she looked at me like she could kill me. My throat tightened. And Andrew, he told me straight. Set. I love my wife. Keep your distance. Set. I respected that. But Victoria didn't believe him. She thought we were having an affair. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I never wanted this. Barrett leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Victoria Sipp's jealousy wasn't baseless. It was fueled, and jealousy, Mr. Johnson, often leads to motive. I opened my folder and slid the grocery receipt onto the table. Andrew was alive at 7:22 p.m. buying food. Yet someone rented a car at 7 p.m. in his name. You see the problem? Lucy wiped her nose. Andrew mentioned money troubles once. Said Victoria pushed him to sign extra insurance last spring. $5 million if anything ever happened. I blinked. $5 million? Barrett nodded grimly. Confirmed. Policy dated March 18th. Beneficiary, Victoria Johnson. Witnessed by her signature. My stomach turned. I could picture Victoria's careful pen strokes. I remembered the day Andrew told me he hated paperwork, how she had handled it all. At the time, it sounded like marital teamwork. Now it smelled like a setup. I whispered, almost to myself. This isn't an accident. It's an investment gone bad. Lucy flinched. Please believe me. I never touched Andrew. I admired him. Yes, but I didn't want money. I didn't want this. I looked at her, weighing fear against guilt. She was naive, maybe foolish, but not the architect of betrayal. Barrett closed his notebook. We still verify the policy through the insurer. Mr. Johnson, I suggest you keep every scrap of evidence. Anything Victoria handled, mail, bills, even her handwriting, might matter later. As we left, the receptionist in the lobby smiled at me kindly. We miss seeing Andrew. He works too hard. Her words struck me like glass shattering. He works too hard. That was Andrew, always carrying more than his share, never imagining the knife would come from his own home. Outside, Barrett handed me a copy of the rental slip. Picked up at Love Field, 7:03 p.m. Andrew Sepp's name. Signature matches his ID. I studied the scrawl. It looked like Andrew's, but off too sharp on the J, too straight on the N. I'd seen my son sign birthday cards, checks, contracts. His hand had rhythm. This one had force. Someone had imitated him, badly. I slipped the paper into Sarah's folder beside the grocery receipt. Two truths sitting side by side, contradicting each other. One said Andrew rented a car. The other said he was buying chicken. Only one could be real. That night, back in my kitchen, I laid it all out like evidence in a trial. Boots, still by the door. Jacket draped over the chair. Grocery receipt, 7:22 p.m. His rental slip, 7:03 p.m. Insurance policy, $5 million. Every item spoke, but together they shouted, My son wasn't dead. He was being erased. I poured myself black coffee and whispered to the silence, "Victoria, what have you done?" The rain outside had stopped, but inside me the storm was just beginning. Barrett Sipp's call came just after sunrise. His tone was clipped, urgent. "Mr. Johnson, we tracked Victoria Sipp's phone. Last night her signal pinged from Grand Prairie. We sent surveillance. You need to see this." By the time I got to the precinct, a manila envelope waited on Barrett's desk. He slid it across. Inside were photos, grainy but damning. Victoria, my daughter-in-law, the woman who once called me dad, walked hand in hand with a man I didn't recognize at first. He was tall, clean-shaven, expensive jacket. Barrett filled in the name Julian Lemos, Andrew's rival, a competitor in 3 major construction bids over the past 2 years. The photo showed them leaving a grocery store. She carried a bag, laughing. Julian leaned in close, too close for anything but intimacy. I studied the curve of her smile. It wasn't the tight-lipped, bitter one she gave Andrew at the dinner table. This was softer, freer, a woman comfortable in betrayal. Barrett tapped the photo. "We Stev confirmed multiple sightings in Grand Prairie. They share a house. Neighbors think they step her husband and wife." My throat tightened. "While my son is missing?" Barrett didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, I returned home and spread the evidence across my kitchen table. Boots, jacket, grocery receipt, rental slip, insurance policy, and now surveillance photos of Victoria smiling with another man. I wrote the date at the top of a page. November 12, 2023. Victoria in Grand Prairie with Julian. I underlined it twice. The ledger was growing, each page a nail in the coffin of her lies. I remembered the nights she slipped out, claiming she was working late. Once, when I asked Andrew where she was, he said, "Office deadlines. She'll be home later." He wanted to believe her. He needed to. But I'd seen the way her eyes darted when her phone buzzed, the way she guarded her screen like a soldier protecting classified files. And then the memory hit me. 3 weeks back, her voice drifting from the kitchen while she thought I was asleep. "Okay, Julian. Tonight I still come by. Bring the truck." We still swing past the cabin. The word cabin burned in my skull. That abandoned wooden place near Pine Forest. I dismissed it as nonsense at the time, but now it was a beacon. Barrett wanted patience. He warned me not to confront her, not to tip my hand, but patience was a thin blanket against the cold knowledge that Andrew was somewhere out there alone or worse. So I began my own quiet campaign. I visited the Tom Thumb again and asked the cashier about November 10th. She remembered Andrew. Tall guy, wet hair, kind of tired looking, bought chicken and coffee. I told him to stay dry out there. Her casual smile was proof enough for me. I added her name to my notes. Eyewitness. Next, I knocked on the neighbor's door 2 houses down. Old Mrs. Peters leaned on her walker. "I saw Victoria's car leave around 9 that night," she said. "Didn't see her return." Another line for the ledger. I even pulled Andrew's jacket from the chair and studied it. The sleeve still smelled faintly of rain and soap. I tucked it into a plastic garment bag. It wasn't just fabric anymore, it was evidence. By evening, my table looked like a Detective Sepp's war room, receipts, statements, photos, jacket, notes. I lit a candle by Sarah Sepp's photo and whispered, "If Andrew breathes, I Sepp's find him. If not, I Sepp's bury the ones who lied." That night, I dreamed of Andrew calling out, but I couldn't see him. Only Victoria's laugh echoed through the trees. The next morning, Barrett returned, folder in hand. His eyes were sharper. "We've got video," he said. On his laptop screen, a grainy clip from a neighbor's camera showed Victoria walking near the site of the supposed crash. Blue jacket, hurried steps, glancing over her shoulder. I pointed at the screen, my heart hammering. "That Sipp's the jacket I washed last week." She was there. Barrett Sipp's voice hardened. "This ties her directly to the scene. Combine it with the policy, the rental, and her relationship with Julian. Be Sepper building a case." I nodded, but my fists stayed clenched. Building a case wasn't enough. Andrew was still missing. Every day he was gone, my fear grew claws. When Barrett left, I stood at the threshold of the house, the November wind rattling the windows. My heart carried one thought. Victoria hadn't just betrayed Andrew, she had betrayed me too. Every Sunday dinner, every time she'd called me Dad, every smile across the table, it had all been part of the disguise. I lit another candle by Sarah Sipp's photo, the flame trembling in the draft. I whispered into the silence. If she thinks she buried him with papers and fire, she doesn't know me. I'll dig until I find him. And when I do, no court in Texas will save her from the truth. That was the night grief hardened fully into resolve. The father in me would mourn, but the man in me, the one who'd spent a lifetime balancing books, keeping receipts, recording details, would wage war with evidence. Victoria wanted to build her new life on my son's ashes. I would show her what it feels like when the foundation crumbles. That week, the pine trees outside Pine Forest seemed to lean toward the road, eavesdropping. Every day felt stretched thin. Each minute a taut wire. Barrett kept the case moving like a slow engine. Calls, surveillance, warrants. But the engine needs fuel, and the only fuel I had was stubbornness and the ledger in my hand. I slept in short bursts on the sofa, Andrew's jacket folded on the arm like a small, accusing ghost. November 18th, I wrote in my notes. The date helped me believe time was still mine, not theirs. Barrett called that morning. We picked up a satellite ping of a pickup truck with fake plates near the old bridge by Pine Forest. The truck matched a plate Julian's been linked to. He breathed out a line only a cop could carry. We're moving a team tonight. I drove out at dusk, because it felt wrong to leave everything to men in uniforms. The drive was 45 minutes, the radio humming country songs about lost loves and ironies. I kept thinking of Andrew's laugh, how he used to whittle wooden ducks on the porch when he was a boy. Those simple images kept me steady. Barrett met me at a turnout a mile from the dirt road that led to the cabin. He was in plain clothes, a dark jacket, tired under-eye crescents. Around us, the pines breathed in the colder air. We'll do this quiet, he said. Teams approach from two sides. I want you in the vehicle, Mr. Johnson. Stay put unless I radio you in. I wanted to tell him I didn't care about protocol, that I'd rather storm the place with a flashlight and a fury that would wake every predator under the trees. But I listened. I would not be reckless. I could afford to be deliberate. My ledger had to live past tonight. The team moved like ghosts. Headlamps swept twig and branch. Radio calls clicked. I remembered how Andrew once learned to tie a knot. He'd been patient, practiced until his hands moved right. That patience would be my guide. At 11:18 p.m., the radio hissed into the car like the voice of fate. Barrett whispered into the microphone, perimeter secure. Any movement? A voice crackled. Negative. Front door shows light. 2 figures seen through the east window. My stomach rolled. 2 figures. One of them could be my son. The other, who knew what mask she would wear now. We parked in the shadow of a dead birch. Through the windshield I could make out the cabin low, hunched under the pines, one light in the window flickering like a slow breath. The men moved. I pressed my palms into my knees until the skin whitened. Hold, Barrett breathed. We're going to listen first. The radio caught a muted conversation. At first it was a jumble, words folded over each other, like a language not meant for ears beyond the room. Then a voice, thin and hoarse, edged through like a thread. Dad, where's my dad? Tell him I'm sorry. Andrew. My lungs forgot how to work. The voice was weak, but it was him. My son's hoarse voice, the one he used when he tried to hold back tears. I couldn't keep the sound in. I whispered, Andy, and the radio crackled as if it too recognized the name and wanted to bow. Barrett's hand found mine. We go in now, he said, quiet and sharp. His voice was the point that tipped fear into action. The breach was fast. The team moved like a practice tide, entry on 3 points. The front door broke under his shoulder, wood splintering. The sound huge and final, shouts, then a rush of movement. I heard a scuffle, a thud, then a dull curse. Someone shouted, Police! Don't set move. For a heartbeat, I couldn't tell where I was, inside of me or outside of me. Then the officer's voice came steady. Mr. Johnson, stay in the car. I stayed, but my legs felt like they belonged to another man. The radio buzzed. We have one male down, bound, female detained. One suspect, Julian resisting. Secure him. The words came fast, clipped. My eyes stung. Every fiber in me wanted to run into the tangle and tear the ropes from Andrew's wrists myself. Barrett climbed back into the car, his jacket smeared with pine sap and dust, his face alive with the odd mix of exhaustion and triumph. He held up a hand as he sat. "Your son sits alive, Mr. Johnson," he said. He held no triumph in his voice, only the raw truth. "He sits conscious but weak. They sedated him to keep him from panicking. Julian sits been apprehended. Victoria sits been detained in the living room." The world narrowed. The cabin light blinked in the distance like a lighthouse that had finally stopped signaling doom. I wish I could write that my legs moved in some noble composition, that I walked in slow, steady steps and faced the villains with precise, righteous anger. But I fumbled for the door, my hands clumsy, and Barrett had to steady me as we stumbled toward the gathered officers. Inside the cabin, the smell hit me, stale air, cleaning solvent, the metallic tang of fear. I saw Andrew before he saw me, pale, thin, wrists chafed where rope had dug into his skin. His eyes opened slowly, registered me, and raw emotion spilled across his face. "Dad," he mouthed. The word was a prayer and a confession. I could have wept with relief. But something deeper roared, a righteous flame that burned a path through every lie. I dropped to my knees and hugged him. He smelled like smoke and something chemical I couldn't name. He held on with everything left in him. Barrett stepped back, cuffed Julian, and kept Victoria sitting on a threadbare couch, while officers took statements. Julian's face was a mask, anger gone brittle, surprise dying last. Victoria looked like a woman who'd been woken from a dream by someone shaking the bed so hard it broke. They took Andrew to an ambulance parked under the pines. He squeezed my hand as they lifted him on the stretcher. "I'm sorry," he whispered between labored breaths. "Not for being taken." He sounded apologetic for every small thing he blamed himself for, as if guilt was a currency he spent freely. Later, in the hospital fluorescent light, Barrett handed me a small evidence bag, a crumpled napkin with a smudged lipstick print found in the truck, a receipt for a motel stay in Grand Prairie on November 11th, and a printed email with a line, "Will proceed once the policy clears." The words on the screen were ugly and precise. The raid had worked, but it hadn't ended everything. It had only opened the next chapter. We had Andrew back, but the ledger had more pages yet. I watched him breathe under the white hospital sheets and felt the ledger in my coat heavy with proof and purpose. Tonight, there would be questions. Tonight, there would be evidence stored, statements taken, and my name written in police logs. But for the first time in days, I slept a little. Not because the danger was gone, but because the son who'd leaned on my shoulder that night was alive and if God allowed would speak the truth that would bury the lies. We had him back, and Barrett had said when he handed me the evidence, "We go in now." December 3rd arrived like a verdict already written on the sky. Cold, clear, the kind of morning that shows every breath. Montville County Courthouse sat like an old god of stone, pillars set against a pale sun. The day they put them under oath, the whole town seemed to convene in that building, reporters with notepads, neighbors in their Sunday best, and a few faces I recognized from police photos. I'd worn my blue sweater, Andrew's favorite, and felt every thread like armor. We arrived early. The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Andrew walked beside me on a cane. He still favored his left side, but his chin was lifted. Barrett and Carter, our lawyer, flanked us with the kind of professional calm I'd come to trust. The clicking of shoes and murmured breath made the room a living metronome. When the bailiff called the court to order, the judge entered, gray hair, a face that had read too many human stories. He looked at us with the impartial gravity of his robe and asked, "Are the parties ready?" The prosecutor rose, papers stacked like a small city in his hands. Victoria and Julian sat at the defendant's table, their restraint obvious in different ways. Victoria's fingers were a white maze around her tissues. Julian's jaw was a tight line of rock. The prosecutor opened with a voice that filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, today you will hear a tale of greed so cold it nearly buried a man alive." The gallery leaned in. Even the sunlight seemed to hold its breath. He began to lay the groundwork. He spoke of a rental car at Love Field, of a body in a charred vehicle, of a hasty insurance claim filed within hours. But it was not the prosecutor's words that cut the room. It was the evidence he let speak. He had photos: Victoria's blue jacket near the crash site, frames taken from a neighbor's camera. He had the rental receipt with a shaky signature. He had the phone records linking Victoria to Julian on the night of November 10th. He had a printout of the insurance policy, dated March 18th, $5 million. Beneficiary, Victoria Johnson. My hands tightened around the edge of the pew, proof stacked against them like winter logs. Then came the audio I'd sworn would sink them. The cabin recording. Barrett had been meticulous. On the tape, Victoria's voice sounded small, ordinary, almost bored. "Just a few more days," she said, "till the money clears." Julian laughed, a sound so flat it left no echo. Andrew's voice threaded underneath, weak, protestful. "Please, Victoria. Don't." The tape cut like a rope snapped. A murmur rose, then a hush. The prosecutor let that silence do its work. "You still also hear testimony that the body in the car was not Andrew Johnson," he said. "A DNA test confirmed it was a different man. A homeless man killed earlier, placed in that vehicle to make the death appear his." I had to steady myself. The idea of a human life used like a tool made some base part of me ache. This was not just betrayal, it was a cruelty so premeditated it was corrosive. When the prosecutor called our first witness, I felt the pulse of the room shift. Officer Barrett took the stand and told the story we already knew in our bones. The knock at my door, the staged bed, the rental slip, the satellite ping near the cabin. He spoke plainly, like a man reading the truth aloud so it could not be whispered away. Then they called me. Standing in the witness box felt like climbing a ladder built from months of fear and ledger pages. I looked at the judge, at the jury, and then at Victoria. She looked older than her years. Her face had that hollow look people get when the world yanks a lie from under them. The oath felt like an old promise, so I raised my hand and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor asked me about the night, the mud on the boots, the rain jacket on the chair, the sticky note by the phone. I told the court about the grocery receipt, Tom Thumb, 7:22 p.m., how I'd tucked it into Sarah's recipe box like a talisman. I told them about the blue jacket I'd washed and then recognized on surveillance video near the crash site. I told them how I'd overheard the word cabin weeks earlier and why that mattered. When the defense attorney rose, he tried to build a different air, doubt, possibility, the old machinery of maybe. He asked about motive, about financial trouble, about Andrew's state of mind. He suggested, without saying it outright, that perhaps my grief had made me see connections where none existed. "Mr. Johnson," he said, with the kind of civility that pretends generosity, "could any of these items have been staged after the fact? Could a husband not control his own fate at times?" I looked at him, calm, quieter than I felt, and said, "My son came home that night. He put his hand on my shoulder. He told me he was tired. I saw the mud on his boots. Those are simple things a man cannot fake on himself. The rental and the policies were done in his name. But I find it impossible that Andrew would rent a car at 7 and buy groceries at 7:22 across town. Something or someone manufactured that narrative." The cross-examination was a tray of cold knives, but when Lucy took the stand, her testimony stitched another hole in the defense. She recounted, under oath, the meeting room incident, the confrontation with Victoria, and confirmed Victoria's volatile behavior. She wept when she told the court how she'd been accused unjustly, and I felt a wary kinship with her foolish youth. Then came the knockout. The prosecutor played the motel receipt found in Julian's truck, November 11th, and a printed email from Julian's account with the line I'd seen, "Will proceed once the policy clears." It was like watching the room breathe in the dull certainty that comes just before a verdict. When the defense called Victoria to testify, She rose like a small wounded animal. For a while she clung to silence, then began to speak, voice fraying. Her words started as regret, about jealousy, about how she felt trapped, about how love can become anger. But then, under pressure, cracks opened. She admitted to being at the scene in a rushed, panicked moment. She admitted to being with Julian. Her lawyer tried to soften it, to paint confusion and poor judgment. Finally, the cabin tape was played in open court. Victoria's tone on the recording was not regretful. She sounded businesslike. Julian's voice was strategic. The jury watched the play of their faces while the tape rolled. Victoria's composure broke like a cheap vase. When she stood to speak in her own defense one final time, her words came out like confession. "I lost myself," she whispered. "I thought if anything happened, everything would change. I never meant for him to suffer." Her voice was thin in the courtroom air. The judge watched her without surprise. He had seen this ledger before, love, money, and the terrible arithmetic that follows. Julian said nothing. He sat with his hands clasped, eyes fixed on a point the room could not reach. Pride had hardened into silence. The closing statements were a study in temperaments. The prosecutor's final words landed like a gavel. This was not a tragic accident. This was a plan to profit from death, to erase a man for a sum of $5 million. The evidence is clear. The motive cold, the legerdemain premeditated. The defense pleaded for mercy, for context, for the jury to consider human frailty. When the jury filed out, the courtroom felt like an animal listening for thunder. In the hall, reporters whispered, pens scratching, hoping for a breath of scandal. Andrew squeezed my hand. His grip was weak but steady. Later, when the verdict came, the judge read it with the same gravity he'd used before. Guilty on counts of attempted murder, kidnapping, and insurance fraud. Verdicts that felt like a sentence and a hymn. Victoria's face crumpled. Julian's expression cracked into something that might have been fear. As they took them away, Barrett leaned in and said softly, "You were right to trust your gut, Mr. Johnson. Your evidence mattered." I nodded, but I felt no triumph. The gavel had fallen, but the sound echoed with more than justice. It carried the weight of what we lost and what we saved. Outside the courthouse, a camera flashed, and someone asked if we had a statement. I looked at Andrew, his eyes sunken but bright, and said, "We told the truth, and it found us." It wasn't the neat poetic line I'd imagined, but it was true. That night, back in our small kitchen, I placed a fresh page in my ledger and wrote December 3rd courtroom verdict. Justice served. Andrew alive. The pages of my life had been stained and rewritten, but at least some lines were honest again. We won a trial, but the work of living and forgiving, if forgiveness was even possible, had just begun. The courthouse emptied slowly that day, the echo of the gavel still ringing in my ears. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, like the world itself wanted to remind us this chapter was closed. But victory doesn't feel the way you think it will. It doesn't sing or dance. It just sits heavy in your chest and makes you wonder what part of you had to be burned to get here. Reporters swarmed on the steps, shouting questions. "Mr. Johnson, how do you feel? Do you have a statement for the family?" I didn't stop. I held Andrew's arm as he leaned on his cane, each step deliberate, his eyes set forward. We weren't there for their headlines. We were there because justice was done. When the verdict was read earlier, 16 years for Victoria, 25 for Julian, I thought I'd feel satisfaction. Instead, all I felt was a hollow ache. The betrayal of someone you let into your family doesn't vanish when a judge reads numbers. It lingers like smoke that won't wash out of your clothes. Andrew squeezed my hand as the police car doors shut on them. His voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. "Dad, I thought I'd never make it back." I pulled him close, his head against my shoulder, the same way I used to comfort him as a boy after a nightmare. Only this nightmare was real, and it had nearly ended his life. We walked past the crowd, past the cameras and curious eyes. Barrett caught up with us, his coat collar turned up against the wind. "If you hadn't kept pushing, we to have buried an innocent man," he said. "Most fathers would have folded when the evidence looked so certain. You didn't set." I looked him in the eye and nodded, though the truth was simpler. "Because I know my son, that sips all." That evening, back at the house, I reheated soup. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the night it had all begun, mud on the floor, jacket on the chair. Andrew lowered himself into his seat carefully, Kane leaning against the table, his movements slow but sure. For a moment it felt almost ordinary, as if the weeks between had been nothing but a bad dream. But then the weight settled again. Victoria had called me Dad. She'd smiled across this very table, passed the mashed potatoes, laughed at Christmas jokes, and all the while she'd been laying the groundwork to erase my son and cash in on his absence. That stain won't wash out. Andrew broke the silence first. Do you think she ever loved me? His eyes searched mine, desperate for something more than pity. I swallowed hard. She loved what you could give her, but that isn't sort of love, son. Not the kind that holds up when storms come. He nodded slowly, a tear sliding down his cheek. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, embarrassed. But I didn't look away. Men cry. Fathers cry. Sons cry. And the truth doesn't change because of it. Later that night, after he'd gone to bed, I sat alone at the table with my ledger open. I turned through every page, receipts, notes, times, names. The ledger was heavy, but it had been our lifeline. Without it, they might have succeeded. Without it, my son would have been another number in an accident file. I wrote the final line for the day, December 3rd. Verdict delivered. Victoria sentenced to 16, Julian to 25. Andrew home, alive. I closed the folder, slid it into Sarah's old recipe box, and rested my hand on the wood. For the first time in weeks, I let myself exhale. Justice had been served. But healing, that was another trial still ahead. Hospitals have their own kind of time. The clocks tick, but days don't move the way they do outside. Weeks blur into antiseptic light and the shuffle of nurses' shoes. Andrew's room overlooked the parking lot, where bare November trees stood like sentries. Every morning I carried my ledger in, like scripture under my arm. He healed slowly. His wrists bore the red shadows of rope. His voice came back hoarse, then steadier. He'd sip broth, then push the tray away, apologizing with his eyes like a boy again. I sat beside him, filling page after page. Names, dates, receipts. Barrett dropped off copies of statements, phone records, motel invoices, the cabin evidence, and I copied them line by line into the ledger. It wasn't about paranoia anymore. It was about truth carved in ink, so no one could bend it again. One evening, December 10th, Andrew asked me, why keep writing? The trial sip's done. They sipper behind bars. I flipped to a fresh page. Because lies live longer than trials. If anyone ever questions what happened, I said'll have every fact ready. This ledger is our shield. He nodded slowly, like the words weighed more than he could lift. When Andrew was finally discharged, we came home to a house that felt both familiar and strange. The mud stain on the kitchen tile was still faintly there, like a scar. His jacket hung in the garment bag I'd saved. The chair he'd once filled with easy laughter now creaked under his slower weight. But he was here, alive. That night, I went to the fireplace. From the folder I pulled the insurance copy, the policy that had nearly cost him his life. $5 million, printed in black ink. His signature scrawled under witness. Victoria Johnson. I stared at it for a long time, the way a man stares at a rattlesnake he's already killed. Then I held it to the flame. The edges curled first, blackened, folded inward. The numbers dissolved into ash. I whispered, "You didn't get him. You didn't get us." Andrew watched from the sofa, his face pale but steady. The firelight made his eyes shine. "Dad," he said softly, "I want to rebuild the company, but I'd still do it clean this time. No shortcuts, no compromises." I nodded. "Good, because shortcuts cut deeper than you think." We sat together as the last corner of that policy disappeared into embers. The room smelled of smoke and old wood. For the first time since November 10th, I felt something shift inside me, like the ground beneath us was firm again. Justice hadn't come with vengeance. It hadn't come with raised voices or slammed doors. It had come with proof, with persistence, with a father's refusal to let go. Before I went to bed, I opened the ledger one last time for the night. At the bottom of the page, under the line about the verdict, I added, "Insurance policy destroyed October 23rd, 12, closure begun." As I closed the book, I whispered words that had carried me through the darkest hours. They tried to erase my son with paper. I erased them with proof. The house was quiet. Andrew slept in his room upstairs, the lamp finally off. The silence was no longer a threat. It was peace. Justice, I realized, isn't always about what a court decides. Sometimes justice is the moment you choose to put an end to the story yourself, to burn the last piece of paper that bound you to betrayal. And in that small Dallas kitchen, with ash cooling in the fireplace and my son's steady breathing drifting from upstairs, I finally allowed myself to believe we had survived the storm. The days after the trial unfolded quieter than I expected. No reporters at the gate, no letters from lawyers, no more late-night calls from Barrett, just silence, the ordinary kind that used to feel empty, but now felt like a gift. Andrew spent his mornings in the garden behind the house. Even though December wasn't kind to soil, he insisted on clearing the frostbitten weeds, on turning the ground as if spring might answer early. Watching him out there, cane leaning against the fence, his breath clouding in the cold air, I realized healing isn't measured in medical charts. It's measured in stubborn little acts of life. I stayed in the kitchen most days, the same kitchen where all this had begun. I cooked more than I ate, filling the house with smells of chicken broth, biscuits, and coffee. When Andrew came in, dirt under his nails, I set a bowl in front of him without a word. He ate, slowly at first, then with the kind of hunger that reminded me of his boyhood. Sometimes, when he thought I wasn't watching, I saw his eyes drift toward Sarah's photo on the mantel. He'd give a small nod, as if telling her, "I'm still here," and I'd nod too. At night, after Andrew went upstairs, I'd open Sarah's diary, the one filled with neat cursive entries about simpler days. I read about Andrew's first bike ride, about our camping trip to Lake Texoma, about the Thanksgiving when he carved the turkey crooked, and she wrote, "Andrew's father tried not to laugh." Her words were a bridge back to a time before greed poisoned our table. On December 15th, I wrote in the final pages myself. My hand isn't as steady as hers was, but the words mattered. Jealousy and greed can turn love into poison, but a father sips love will never be defeated. I closed the diary and set it beside the ledger. One carried the sweetness of memory, the other the weight of proof. Together they told the whole story. Andrew and I talked often, though sometimes the silence said more. One night by the fire he asked, "Dad, do you think I'll ever trust again?" I thought carefully before answering. "Yes, but not the way you did before. Trust will be slower now, but stronger when it comes. Like steel tempered by fire." He nodded, and I saw in his eyes not just the pain of betrayal, but the shape of resilience. Life didn't return to what it was. It never does. But it grew into something steadier. We shared quiet dinners, football games on Sunday, slow walks to the mailbox. These small, ordinary things became our new measure of wealth. Every betrayal leaves a scar. But scars don't just mark where the wound was, they also prove where healing began. And so, when neighbors asked how we were holding up, I smiled softly and said, "We such are rebuilding, day by day." In the end, revenge hadn't been about rage or cruelty. It had been about boundaries, about proving that lies could not overwrite truth, about choosing justice over silence. Victoria and Julian had tried to erase Andrew with forged papers and flames, but in court, in the ledger, in the truth we held tight, we erased them instead. That night, as I banked the fire and listened to Andrew Sepp's steady breathing upstairs, I whispered one last line into the quiet. A line I hoped he would carry longer than the pain. "You didn't lose me, you gave me away, and I took myself back." Life after a trial isn't a clean slate. It's more like waking up in a house after a storm. Some walls still standing, others splintered, everything damp with what almost destroyed you. But piece by piece, Andrew and I started to rebuild. Lucy was the first to come by. She showed up one cold morning in December, clutching a paper bag of muffins like an offering. Her eyes were red, her shoulders hunched. "Mr. Johnson," she said softly, "I came to say I'm sorry. I never meant to make things harder for Andrew. I admired him, but I never wanted this nightmare. I studied her face. She looked like a child standing in front of the Principal Sepsa's office, guilty and scared. I poured her coffee and sat across the table. Lucy, you told the truth when it mattered, that Sepsa's what counts now. She nodded quickly, tears spilling. Sep resigned from Genesis Construction. I can set walk those halls anymore. Not after everything. She pushed the muffins toward me. Please give these to Andrew. Tell him I wish him peace. When she left, the house felt a little lighter, like one shadow had lifted. I carried the muffins upstairs. Andrew smiled faintly when he saw them. She didn't have to, he murmured, breaking one in half. But he ate, and I took that as another step toward healing. Weeks passed. By January, Andrew had begun reorganizing his company. From his home office, still weak but driven, he drafted policies about transparency and ethics. No more shortcuts, Dad, he said one night. No more looking away. If people sign, they'll mean it. I nodded. His voice carried the conviction of a man who had seen how fragile trust can be. Neighbors stopped by often, bearing casseroles, pies, kind words. Some spoke too loudly, as if sympathy needed volume, but their intentions were good. We thanked them all. The small acts of community wrapped around us like a quilt. One Sunday, Barrett visited. He came with daisies in a mason jar, his wife's idea, he said with a shrug. He placed them on Sarah's photo and sat at our kitchen table like he'd been coming over for years. You know, he said, stirring sugar into his coffee, this case reminded me why I started this job. Most folks fold when things look certain. But you, he pointed his spoon at me, you trusted what you knew about your son more than any badge, any report. That kind of faith is rare. I chuckled, weary but grateful. Faith isn't set complicated, Barrett. It sets just knowing when something doesn't add up and refusing to let anyone tell you it does. He raised his mug to Father's intuition. We clinked cups, and for a moment the kitchen felt like a place of victory, not just survival. Later that evening, when Andrew had gone to bed, I sat alone with Sarah's diary and my ledger. I placed them side by side on the table. The sweet past and the bitter proof. One carried laughter, the other carried justice. Both were necessary. The house was quiet, but not hollow. There was life in it again. Slow, healing, cautious life. And that, I realized, was the real aftermath. Not just verdicts and sentences, but the work of putting one foot in front of the other until the ground feels steady. As I closed the diary, I heard Andrew upstairs, humming softly a tune Sarah used to sing while folding laundry. The sound drifted down the staircase like a promise. That night, I wrote the final line for the day in my ledger, January 7th, 2024. Lucy apologized. Andrew rebuilding. Barrett visited, house beginning to breathe again. For the first time in months, I felt like we were no longer living inside the shadow of betrayal. We were stepping beyond it. By February, the house had settled into a rhythm again. Andrew's strength returned little by little, his steps sure, his laughter less hesitant. The cold air carried the promise of spring, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we had finally outrun the storm. Then the letter came. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address, the kind courts use for official mail. I sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from my coffee, and slid it open with the same knife Sept once used to cut Sarah Sep's birthday cakes. Inside, the words struck like old poison. To the Honorable Court. I appeal my conviction. My actions were driven not by malice, but by love. Love made me desperate, and desperation made me careless. I never wished harm to Andrew. Please reconsider my sentence. Signed, Victoria Johnson. Love. That was the word she dared to use. She had plotted my son's death, signed his name to papers, built a future on his ashes, and now she wanted to wrap it in the silk of love. My hands trembled, not with rage, but with a kind of weary disgust. I carried the letter into the living room, where Andrew sat reading. His cane leaned against the sofa, his hair catching the winter sun. I handed it to him silently. He read it once, then let it fall to the floor. Love doesn't lock you in a cabin. he said quietly. Love doesn't try to cash you in for $5 million. I picked up the letter and walked to the fireplace. The flames were low, licking at old oak logs. I held the paper above them. For a second, I hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of ritual. Then, I let go. The flames caught quickly, curling the edges into black lace. The ink twisted, warped, then vanished into smoke. Victoria's words, her plea, her final attempt to rewrite the story, all of it turned to ash in seconds. Andrew stepped up beside me, his hand on my shoulder. Dad, he said softly, today I settle Cook. I looked at him. My son, alive, scarred but standing. The boy who used to burn toast, now offering to make a meal. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once. I nodded. All right, son, the kitchen sep's yours. We ate together that evening, laughter threading between bites of overcooked pasta. The house no longer smelled of fear or betrayal. It smelled of garlic and bread and second chances. Later, when Andrew went upstairs, I sat alone by the dying fire. The ashes of the letter still glowed faintly, then faded to gray. I opened my ledger one last time and wrote the closing line, February 2nd, 2024, appeal letter burned. Story ended. Life continues. I closed the book, slid it beside Sarah Sipp's diary, and whispered to the quiet house. You didn't lose me, you gave me away, and I took myself back. The flames sank to embers, but the warmth lingered. For the first time since that night in November, I felt free.